Good morning and welcome to the final day of CSPC 2020. It's really blown by, hasn't it? My name is Andrew Harris and I am a CSPC Program Committee member. On behalf of CSPC, it is my pleasure to welcome everyone. We're about to participate in a very exciting session, the second of the Short Talk series, Short Talk Session 2. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping notes. Please note that this session will be recorded. Please don't forget to tweet about your favorite events and panels at the conference using @SciencePolicy and the hashtag CSPC2020. Don't be shy. Please ask questions using the Q&A button at the top of your screen during each of the presentations. At the end of the session, there will be a short survey that should only take a minute or two to fill out. I encourage all of you to please fill out this survey to help make CSPC better in the future, especially as we navigate this new online medium. Each speaker will deliver a 10-minute presentation, after which we will have several minutes for the Q&A session. Without further ado, I will now pass things over to our first speaker, Sylvaiane Duval. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. Thank you for attending this short talk. I assume we're all here because we share an interest in communicating science clearly, honestly, and openly. I've come to the conclusion that the general public does have low science literacy, but we, scientists, policymakers, media, government, we do play a part in allowing disinformation to emerge and to evolve. It is our responsibility to promote and mediatize science and knowledge that are reliable, correct, based on sound methodology and without hyperbole. So yes, I understand that science is an evolving process. Yes, I know that the peer review process is flawed. These things are not within our immediate individual control. What is taking a last look at a message or a piece of content with a critical eye so that we don't have to debunk it later. So before I leave you with some takeaway messages, let me show you some examples of we, establishment, could have done better. And we're not moving forward. Here we go. Oh, let's move back. Here we go. So about this time last year, 11,000 scientists signed a petition to declare a climate change emergency. And I'm sure you remember it because it got a lot of ink initially, and then it got some that it really didn't need. So problem one, the lead scientist used a 4-step process to verify the signatories, but they still let Mickey Mouse slip through, as well as 34 other mostly duplicate names. So this tells me that nobody actually had eyes on the petition. Climate change is one of the top 3 polarizing issues. Every communication, article, opinion gets scrutinized minutely. So not doing a simple check like this affects the credibility of the entire petition, which climate deniers can then exploit. Problem 2, I didn't find any indication that the 11,000 scientists were all specifically climate scientists. So this is a fallacy of extension. We assume that expertise in one area is generalizable to another area. But a scientist in liver disease may not know any more about climate change than I do, and therefore have no business signing the petition, if that's what happened. But again, it opens the science to criticism and mistrust, even though the scientists themselves had nothing but good intentions. So here we go. Way back in 2006, and I know this is a long time ago, but bear with me, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization published a study called Livestock's Long Shadow. And that stated that livestock produced a staggering 18% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. In other words, that livestock were doing more harm to the climate than all modes of transportation put together. That got a huge amount of media attention. But the methodology was flawed. That 18%, not true. The FAO and the senior author owned up to their error, and they published corrections, which got no media attention. My own clients in livestock genomics are still dealing with that fallout, so we're talking 14 years. The beef industry's focus on making cattle more feed efficient and therefore produce less methane is a direct result of the false information. And advocacy groups still use those stats to call for an environmental tax on beef and to promote the vegan diet. And just so that we're clear that these are not isolated errors, the World Health Organization has a pattern of mistakes and miscommunications. So this is the story as it appears on UBC's news website. It's perfectly reasonable, it's true, and as stories go, it's not wildly earth-shattering, pardon the pun. It mentions the 16 planets only once in the text. It devotes a few small paragraphs to the potentially habitable one because those are rare, and then the rest of the story focuses on method. And here's what the Weather Network did with it. It added a raft of conditionals and possibilities to get to the ta-da drumroll moment, which is a planet teeming with life. I have no idea where that came from. Certainly not the UBC source, which, as I said, was fairly humdrum, and not even the student's paper. I checked. The frightening thing is, more people get their news from the Weather Network, probably, than traditional media. So the potential for propagating this exaggeration is enormous. In this case, planets aren't a cause for immediate concern or behavior change, but the Weather Network publishes regularly on climate change. And who's to say what it might do to interpret a story on that subject? So I've got loads of examples on how the media have botched reporting. Because of the consolidation of media, there are only a few large players left. Journalists cover many beats, very few are trained in science communication, and fewer still have the knowledge of statistics to judge faulty science when they see it. Now, the UBC story was clean, but I have plenty of examples of stories released by university comms offices that aren't. I like this one because the amplification of the error is so clear. It started when the intern responsible for the story wrote a boring but true headline that Imperial's comms office refused. So he then added invisibility cloak because Imperial is known for its research on that subject, and it's marginally related to seismic cloaking. But the term invisibility cloak does not appear in the article. And then, proving my point in the last slide, the Mail and the Mirror pumped up the news value to interest their particular readers. Toxoplasmosis, a disease from parasite count in cat poop, infects 2 billion people worldwide, and it's been linked to really strange behaviors. And countries with low rates of toxos, such as Australia, tend to have fewer entrepreneurs. So conversely, infected people are more likely to have the entrepreneurial spirit, according to the authors. So A, who the heck funded this? And why was it released to the public? For skeptics, it's a gift. It says that science isn't worth doing and certainly not worth wasting money on. And that scientists are stuck in their ivory towers and they have a really low grasp of what's useful in the real world. In 2015, scientists announced that they had strong evidence of liquid water on Mars. 2 years later, a study in Nature Geoscience said that the mysterious marks could also be made by falling sand and dust. And as of August this year, there is another competing theory, that the valley formations are ice sheets. But clearly, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't have enough data to proclaim definitively. So again, for a subject like this, there's no urgency to publicize. Why is this out there? The public expectation is that once science is published, the knowledge is cast in stone. So while it's important to correct errors, as in the long shadow, it's equally important not to theorize at the public's expense. And here's why. A well-known example, Dr. Tam has lots of credibility among the public, but it took a serious hit on the masks issue, probably because she probably wasn't trained as a science communicator or as a spokesperson, and nor probably most of the people who help her prepare speaking notes. Until March, it probably wasn't a big deal. Now it is, and I'd like to think that some serious expertise has been added to her team. This is the damage that a flip-flop that doesn't tell enough of the scientific backstory can do to trust and to people's expectations of science and how they react to it. Updating recommendations about the masks on the basis of new evidence should not be viewed as a failure of the system. In fact, it's evidence that public health officials are doing their jobs. I didn't see any kind of messaging like that, which would have enhanced public trust in the system instead of lowering it. Once knowledge is in the public domain, it's impossible to pull back or to control what others do with it, as we've just seen with the UBC example. In these days of lightning-fast media response times, to paraphrase Winston Churchill, a mistake can go around the world before the truth has chance to get its pants on. He probably said trousers. We are likely to stick with information that confirms our core values and beliefs. We know this as confirmation bias. We invest so much intellectual capital in our position that we just can't walk away from it. New evidence doesn't change a thing. Hence the crucial importance of the initial messaging and a full backstory to explain it if it's likely to evolve. When new knowledge and policy prompts people to question the competence of leaders and their motivation, again, we have a responsibility to produce clear, unhyped, actionable messages that reflect the accuracy, reflect the uncertainty accurately. Dominique Brossard, chair of the Department of Life Science Communications at Wisconsin-Madison, said this about COVID-19. At the end of the day, it's better to say, right now, the best practice is this. We're not 100% sure, and we're doing everything we can to find out. We'll let you know as soon as we know more. So let's all commit to taking that last critical look at our messaging before sending it out into the real world. The Weather Network did rehabilitate itself somewhat in my eyes when I found this. Seconds. And I apologize to anybody here who's working hard on curriculum issues. Humans need so much knowledge to function in today's world, there can't possibly be time to teach it all. So this is my wish, which I share, because I hope there are some policy people with us today. Today's kids are going to be looking after us in our dotage. They'll be running the world. If only a small proportion of them are interested in or understand science, the disconnect between belief and evidence, and therefore the disinformation, can only increase. Nobody wins. So I'm happy to try and answer your questions. Please be gentle.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Sylvaiane. That was a really interesting presentation. And, you know, I think this is something that as scientists we lament. And when these mistakes are made, it's detrimental to, as you point out, the entire institution. So really important points that you bring up. And it brings to mind, for example, at the beginning of the COVID crisis, yes, this flip-flopping, well, what was perceived by the public as, you know, flip-flopping on masks, you know, new data which was coming out. But this is, yeah, this is a significant problem. So you point out that we should be more careful about, you know, looking things over very critically before we press send. You know, this relates to, are you meaning like social media? Are you talking about in terms of publishing in general, any kind of engagement with the public?
Absolutely, everything. As I said, media, especially social media, functions on very, very fast cycles, and it's very easy to put your foot in your mouth. But if we just pause that little bit before sending a message out, we can say, okay, again, like I just mentioned, if we assume that somebody is going to trash everything that we say, then we're going to be just that little bit more careful about what it is that we say. I mean, we do it now because we don't want to offend anybody with you know, the certain words that are not acceptable anymore, and we should be equally careful with what we say about science, just to make sure that it has no holes in it, or as few holes as possible, and to explain any holes that there still are.
So some opponents to this might say that, well, you know, Twitter is a casual space, and you know, you have people on there who are, you know, not taking it too seriously. So, you know, what would you say to those people who kind of absolve their responsibility to this?
Those media reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and that climate deniers, activists, they go there to look for mistakes. So just the fact that information like that, or a message that somebody just flung out carelessly, can have a mistake, they can use it to amplify it. So again, it just doesn't serve the purpose.
I agree 100%. So this is how, as it relates to, you know, what I was just mentioning as it relates to social media. But for example, in terms of publication, you know, you talk about having this kind of this backup plan in case something goes wrong. Would you advocate, for example, for like a lay summary for every research paper? You know, every scientist has to provide some kind of one-page document which would be readable for the general public. Yeah, for example, this would solve this issue that we've seen with you know, news sources which exceptionalize and kind of, you know, overreach on certain findings.
That is a great idea. I hadn't actually thought of that. It wasn't necessarily a backup plan that I thought, as opposed to just reading something once or getting somebody else to read a message before it goes out, just to see what somebody else's perspective might be on it. We all think we're communicating clearly, but certainly I know when I talk to my husband, he comes back with something completely different. So clearly, miscommunication all over the place, unintentional. Lay summary, and I think probably some of the more popular journals like Nature do ask for them already. That's a great way of preventing mistakes, because you're providing the information that journalists can then use. Many years ago in my unfortunate past, I worked for an organization out of Washington, D.C. that provided lay summaries of journal papers to the media. And we were limited to 350 words for a total article, of which about 50 were reserved for an external comment, an independent comment. So 300 words to summarize a whole article. The only way you can do that reasonably is to hit on one particular point. And I realized at the time, oh my goodness, you know, this is not the best way to represent what this article was trying to say. I'm just hitting one point and missing out all the background that covers this. But I knew that this particular organization's anything, you know, 351 words, that one word would be deleted. So there's no point giving extra information that just wouldn't be provided to the media. So there needs to be, if you are doing a lay summary yourself as an author, you get to control the message. Marshall McLuhan, you know, go Marshall. That's the best way to go, I agree.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I believe that we're out of time, but thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about. And yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. Happy weekend, everybody.
So next we have Saheel Mehta, and yeah, take it away.
Hello, everybody. My name is Saheel Mehta. Good morning. Thank you to the Canadian Science Policy Center, especially the organizers, coordinators, and technical support for hosting this conference and allowing me to speak today. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. Of course, construction has just started outside of my window as this session has begun. My short talk today will discuss the importance and risk of open access science and technology policy, It continues the overall discussion on the role of academia, the role academia needs to play in supporting early career researchers in the path to science policy, a topic that has been reiterated and discussed through many panels of this conference, especially over the years. Let's see here. A little bit about me and my background. I'm the Director of Communications for the Journal of Science Policy and Governance, a nonprofit organization, an open access peer-reviewed publication managed by and for students, policy fellows, and young scholars in science, technology, and innovation policy. Since 2011, JSPG has served as a vehicle for students and early career researchers to bolster their research and writing credentials in science policy. You can follow us on social media at SciPol Journal. Personally, I'm fascinated by the world of science communication and its role in shaping discourse about policy issues. The outbreak of the 2013-2014 Western Africa Ebola epidemic and public messaging around that time, not too dissimilar from our current pandemic, in the United States emphasized the need for a robust science policy interface, in my view. I just want to preface a little bit of my presentation today with some of my biases. I'm probably coming from a US-centric view of academia, and I don't have a PhD and haven't been in formal academia in quite some time and feel quite new to the science policy realm. But I felt compelled to give this talk today because of conversations I've had with early career researchers and science policy practitioners about a theme that continuously emerges in that the academic system does not support science and technology policy or advocacy work, which feels a little out of line given the current state of the world. To me, it appears that the science policy community is continuously growing or fastly growing, but it often fails to acknowledge the risk academics take for their research and their careers to publish or become involved in science advocacy. I want to echo the calls for academia to incorporate and embrace science policy as a legitimate pathway and career in a standalone or integrative sense. In a call to action, I propose a two-part framework. First is the declaration from the science policy and scientific community to assert the importance of science policy within academia. Additionally, national science policy organizations like CSPC here in Canada and the National Science Policy Network in the States, just to name two, should coordinate and implement standardized baseline framework for a science policy curriculum integrated into the undergraduate and postgraduate learning experience. I believe there's a sense of urgency for healthy evidence-based policy decisions. It's come to a head as we find ourselves in multiple crises in which we continue to see misinformation flourish. The possible short-term crisis in the COVID-19 pandemic and the long-term crisis in the climate change crisis continue to undermine the concept that scientists should stick to the lab on these urgent issues and that they could be part of the robust evidence-based discussions. However, right now, many early career scientists who are often have novel ideas to tackle large policy issues based on their research are often discouraged to pursue public policy changes. For example, Alexandra Stark of New America, a senior researcher at New America, succinctly put it like this: policy work and policy relevant research is not valued and is in fact looked down upon by departments obsessed with getting their students in tenure track jobs, despite or perhaps perversely because of the paucity of available opportunities in academia. Now, Alexandra Stark has a PhD in political science and government, and the fact that somebody in political science in and of itself feels discouraged from pursuing public policy ideas speaks to the nature in which academia kind of really looks down on policy work for academics. That risk of participating in policy work for scientists is especially high for minoritized populations who already might be burdened by the inherent systemic issues within academia. So this year, we have seen a strong appetite for science policy courses. For example, my colleague at the Journal, Adriana Bankston, partnered with the University of California, Irvine GPS STEM program, along with other organizations, to create the Science Policy and Advocacy STEM Scientist Certificate Program. The Journal's annual sponsor, NSPN, has started the Science Policy Scholars Bootcamp. Deborah Steen, a governing board of the Journal, has started the Science and Technology Policy Academy. S4D4C has launched their own certificate program in science diplomacy. All of these instructional courses on the world of science policy have been in high demand and hugely popular, with hundreds of applicants and enrollees. Again, it underscores the appetite for this type of content. So the question is, sorry that the slides didn't advance. The question is, how do we integrate this into the framework for early career researchers, especially at the undergraduate and postgraduate level? I believe it needs a two-step approach: declaration and a curriculum. The declaration is a values-based mission. It seeks to address the issues within institutions that can be improved, to emphasize the nature and importance of science policy, and should point to metrics in which we can assess the value of science policy. A successful declaration is the San Francisco DORA Declaration, which sought to emphasize how academia has become too obsessed with high impact publishing and not on the day-to-day work that scientists perform within academia, and try to devalue or de-emphasize the ruthless nature in which the publishing world works for scientists. And then curriculum is an approach to developing how science policy is going to be practiced. And I believe that national organizations like CSPC, or science policy organizations, I should say, should develop an approach. And this would be affecting institutional change in developing a methodology for which science policy can be practiced. An example is this year, my colleague Jean-Christophe and Marga Gall-Soler published Building a Science Diplomacy Curriculum in Frontiers in Education. And in their paper, they outline some of the issues I've been talking about today. So far, science diplomacy has largely been taught through extracurricular courses, workshops, and often self-organized by university student groups or international scientific organizations. They sought to develop a framework and curriculum that universities could adopt to develop their own science diplomacy training programs. And I believe that science policy should also model what JC and Marga have done here, and try to develop a curriculum in which could be adopted by multiple institutions to help improve the quality of science policy outputs, and make sure that whatever policy recommendations these early career researchers are thinking about are rigorous and goes through the same sort of processes in which science is evaluated. There are many programs out there that seek to integrate science and technology policy, master's programs all over the world, and this is just a small subset that you see on your screen. What I'm talking about a little bit more is a integrative approach within the undergraduate and postgraduate experience to help emphasize the pathway that science policy presents for scientists. It's not, it's often presented as a dichotomy that you can pursue tenure track academia as a straight science, or, you could pursue in other fields like science policy. It doesn't have to be this stark dichotomy. It can be an integrative approach within academia itself. So I think that what the work JC and Marga have done within developing a science diplomacy curriculum is a work that we could seek to mirror within the science policy community. So there are multiple ways of impacting policy through publishing right now. Sylvaiane talked about how you can impact policy or perceptions through mass media. I want to emphasize the nature in which this publishing process or the advocacy of science policy or scientific issues needs to be done in an open manner. And we've seen some wonderful examples in the journal. The National Science Policy Network has an op-ed accelerator allowing scientists to really craft and hone their message about policy issues, and the Canadian Science Policy Center also has featured editorials. Again, I just want to emphasize the nature in which academics feel like they are taking risks in pursuing science policy and science advocacy, and I believe that by developing a framework to support academics as they seek to endeavor in applying their science to public policy, that will help refine and improve public policy building within society. Yeah, so I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah.
That was great. Thank you so much, Saheel. And I think a topic that is really top of mind for many people right now, what we've seen throughout the conference, several times anyway, in the sessions that I've been a part of or have seen, that people are saying, why are we calling these alternative career paths? They are not the alternative. Many more people end up outside of academia than inside of academia. So yeah, really happy to hear you talk about this. And you talk about two different aspects, right? The declaration and the curriculum. So I wonder if you could, so you're advocating for changing the curriculum at the undergrad level, but you don't think that it is something that could be discussed earlier, even in high school science classes, for example?
Oh no, that would be fantastic, right? The whole pathway, if we can, in my experience, talking to legislators, especially when I used to do a bit of science writing, when lawmakers were discussing what inspired them to advocate for a particular bill relating to environmental issues or health policy issues, often they find that young voices, or what they say is that young voices really swayed how they perceive an issue. So, for example, I spoke with a politician from Iowa who said he had a classroom, high school classroom, explain to him some water management issues. And that really led that inspired him to really pursue a legislation to improve the environmental quality of wastewater. And so, yeah, it'd be great if we can implement these sorts of ideas early on, because I find that they might be effective in impacting the policymaking process.
Great, yeah. We have time for one more question. So not necessarily related to SciPol, but what are your thoughts about using open access frameworks in IP production and communication of research and development sometimes there are conflicts of interest?
Not my, I believe for the discussion I'm trying to approach is that open access is important because transparency issues exist within the science policy or scientific community. A lot of folks look towards scientific journals, often met with a paywall, and want to be informed about issues, but often find that it is mired in language that isn't open or is paywalled off. So I find that an emphasis on open data, open science, for example, Plan S, which we see in Europe and rolled out in other countries, emphasize the nature in which the value should be placed on open discussions about scientific issues. In terms of IP, I would say, you know, I wouldn't have the right answer for that right now. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Maybe they can reach you on Twitter and you can have I wish we could have a longer discussion, but unfortunately we are out of time. But thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, great. So next we have Ariella Lukach. Please take it away.
Thanks, Andrew, and thank you, CSPC, for having yet another wonderful year of this conference. And thank you, those out there that we can't see who are listening to us today. So my name is Ariella Lukach. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Positioning with Stiletto. Stiletto is a market research and strategic planning firm, and we really specialize in high impact projects for organizations and communities. When I say high impact, we just mean move the needle, either improve something you're doing right now or work on something new. We really work at the intersection of industry, government, and academia to drive economic growth and social prosperity. And we do that by helping organizations and communities become more focused, resilient, and competitive. We do work from coast to coast in Canada and the US, which hopefully gives a perspective that would be of interest. We work across the world as well. We have a network of partners, and we're really trying to build cohesion and linkages in the innovation and innovation support ecosystem. So with the introductions out of the way, let me dive right in with who and why should measure social and environmental impacts. So there are quite a few drivers, and recently we have seen this come to light quite a bit, and we have seen that growth that is not inclusive or sustainable leads to socioeconomic imbalance. And when I say sustainable, I mean in an economic, social, environmental way. And we have seen this during COVID quite dramatically, at how COVID has had disproportionate impacts on different communities, such as those with different incomes, or different genders. We've also seen social unrest, the Black Lives Matter movement, the Me Too movement. We've seen statues being toppled over. And over the years, of course, we have seen pollution and global warming increasingly more and more. So what is happening is that people are awakening, and organizations and governments are really required to deliver significantly more value to their constituents. So if it's public demand for policy, science, and growth that are really socially and environmentally responsible, if it's investors and funders that want to support organizations, scientists that create social and environmental benefit in addition to knowledge and financial results. So how do you communicate that? Well, the traditional metrics that we use to show what our impact is are simply not enough. And we say that what you can measure is what you can control. So organizations and governments really need to understand and communicate well what are the short term, but also medium term and long term, as we know global impact doesn't happen in a day, impacts of their activities and their policies. And we need this from all the way from the design phase of whatever activity or policy it is, all the way to the daily operations. And we need to be smart and constantly think and evaluate what are the repercussions, what are the impacts of of the activities that we're doing right now. And so I hope that this makes you see that who is really everybody. It's industry, it's companies, it's post-secondary institutions and individual scientists, it's governments and policies, it's economic development organizations, those who work in the intersection. It's really everybody that needs to understand their impact for buy-in, for market appeal, for funding, for ongoing success, and honestly to do good in the world, which I believe most people want to do with their activities and policies. And so I'll try to explain what do I mean when I say measure it and how do we do it. I'll start with a refresher for economic impact. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with it, but it is measured using traditional indicators such as GDP or gross domestic product growth, number of jobs, wages, and salaries. What we talk about when we talk about social and environmental impact is we actually add two layers. The first is forecasting, is actually looking into the future, not just where you were and what you did in the past years, but how is your current operation or your new idea or your new policy going to have an impact in the future. And we are adding the social and environmental layer. So our model actually uses the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I hope that everybody throughout the conference, if not before, have heard quite a bit about the SDGs. And we incorporate inputs from economic impact assessment to show how these SDGs can show the impact that activities have. So I'll walk you through the process to, again, hopefully explain it better. I want you to start thinking of what are you doing to make a change and what change can that make? So with your policy, with your science, with your product, with your activity and existence, what change can that make? And I want you to think in actual different time scales. What can I do tomorrow? What can be 10 years down the line? What can be 50 years down the line, the impact? And what impact do you want to generate? And do you need to make a change in what you are doing to generate the impact that you want to have? Then we look at outcomes of these activities. And then we actually look at quantifiable metrics bucketed by the SDGs to show your impact. So to explain this a bit better and give you an idea of how it might look, I'll give you an example of a recent social and environmental impact study that we did, where two academic institutions wanted to come together to build an innovation district in the clean tech sector. And the impetus for that was to really drive not just economic improvement in their area, but really social and environmental prosperity. So the idea of creating a hub that would create local jobs, that would mean people of that area would have better jobs, not just local, but better jobs. And with the focus of clean tech, would have also a positive environmental impact as they do these activities. And so we were thinking, how can we bucket these SDGs to really capture the impact that such an initiative can have? So this is an example where we actually thought at the time scales, in the short term, we were looking at that local community and really the micro level indicators of the community and citizen quality of life. And examples are good health and well-being, quality education, being that this was driven by academic institutions. In the medium term, we were looking at, can we actually make this impact broader on a national scale by building resilient communities? And this will be achieved if you actually take the model, this collaborative model, this clean tech model, and replicate it in other places, as well as developing the technologies and outputs of this innovation districts. And then hopefully in the long term, we can really have sustainable social change in the global scale, hopefully, with, again, replicating the model and really implementing these clean technologies that would hopefully come out of this district across the world and in communities across the world. So I'm just going to pick, and we had quantifiable impacts here. I'm just going to pick on decent work and economic growth. That's to show how can we add a layer other than just we created jobs. So I'll walk you through a bit of a cascade. So we have these new and better jobs that are created because of the existence of this initiative. Then we have more local graduates, not just graduates from the academic institutions, but people in the area. So you have graduates and people in the area that have these jobs that they can work in. So because of that, you are actually reducing the need for people to commute out of that area into other locations for work, which means you are reducing hours of commute and kilometers driven. And you can actually quantify the impacts of that. And these are just two example metrics that I have here of, because people drive less, you actually can quantify the reductions in CO2 emissions from people driving. And you also, people now have more time because they don't commute as much, which means they can have more time to volunteer in their local community. So these are just two examples of quantifiable metrics of this impact of this initiative. So I want to show one diagram that this is, if you're familiar with economic impact, you would be familiar with the direct, indirect, and induced. And so I want everybody listening to think of how you can make an impact, and you can be either direct, indirect, and or induced. So as an example, you can have direct SDG related education and training. So if you talk about sustainable development curriculum as an example. You can also have indirect by delivering education and training with sort of an SDG mindset of guidelines. So ensure that your enrollment and graduation is gender balanced, that you have underrepresented groups. And then you can have secondary beneficiaries. So if you think of developing a clean technology or supporting the development of clean technology, an example of induced impacts would be secondary beneficiaries. So how many lives would the science that you're working on, would the policy that you're developing, would the technology that you're working on, how many lives would that touch, and hopefully for the better? So I'll leave you with just in sake of time, I'll rush through COVID a bit. I just want to point that COVID did have an impact on the economic landscape. And what we're seeing is that different industries were impacted differently. Of course, traditional industries like leisure and travel or traditional manufacturing were on one end of the spectrum being hit quite a bit. On the other end of the spectrum, those who either had opportunity, like medical devices, but those who pivoted, like e-commerce, while your traditional retail was not doing so well, e-commerce was booming. Manufacturers that pivoted and switched to essential manufacturing had opportunities. And so being conscious of what is happening, being agile can help. And we do see that there's opportunity for growth in multiple industries, if not in the immediate term, at least post-opening. And that would come to those who would think the most of how can we build back better, which I'm sure you have heard before. So how can we take those who were the most affected and really incorporate them into building back better? If it's displaced middle-aged worker, international students, Indigenous people, how do we involve them in the science, in the policy, in the technology and economic growth to really build back better? So just to summarize, I want you to think of, if you were to think of your own impact, what would you recommend doing? Well, we would think to identify your top UN SDGs. So really focus, try to maybe pick the 4 you think you are the best at, that you can have the most impact with. Then collect data to really build the impact model, both from your organization and from external sources. Then build the social and economic impact model. We do it with our chief economist. And then the other things that we can do to build on top of it, and again, I want everybody to keep that in mind, is how do you identify funding envelopes? If you want to make an impact and make a change, but you need infrastructure, you need funding for your activities. And then how do you integrate it into your strategic planning in the short, medium, and long term? And of course, you want to keep measuring and benchmarking over time. And the last thing is, again, develop programming and infrastructure to support making more impact. So I'll stop there, and thank you again for listening. I hope that I could pique your interest and get you thinking on how you can have better social and environmental impact to your activities. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ariella. That was very interesting. And for those of you who are paying attention, I'm sorry I have to continue to shift in my seat because I'm being followed by the sun. I hope it's just as sunny as it is where you are, but not shining in your face. So with respect to your talk, and you mentioned that you're trying to develop these kind of medium and long-term forecasting methods, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm not an economist, but Can you describe how accurate these are, given that, for example, in the COVID world, we've seen that it's difficult to predict how things will be even, 6 months from now. So this must be a significant challenge for your company.
No, not at all, to be honest. And so when you think of traditional economic impact, it is actually thinking sometimes even 5 years out, not more than that. But it really is forecasting, and it's forecasting. It takes into considerations assumptions. And I know that as scientists, we are always trying to think as deeply as we can. But the reality is, you can't always be focused on just what's happening right now to drive change, right? And so you have to be somewhat visionary, but with assumptions that make sense to build future-looking models. And so even if you think of the impact of COVID-19, I'll take international students as an example. International students have been a tremendous growth engine in this country. I, in fact, was an international student and had stayed in Canada post-graduation. And even though right now we're having a bit of issue with international students and, of course, visa and having them there, it won't be sustainable to not have them come in the long term. And so while there might be a bit of a blip, it might even be a year where we have a bit of a challenge. Looking into the future, international students would definitely continue to be a growth engine in Canada. And so that's an example of an assumption that we can make, that even though there are shocks to the system and that's just reality, there are definitely things we can take into consideration as we do forecasting. Of course, that being said, everybody needs to understand that even the traditional economic impact is based on assumption and is based on forecasting, but it does give you an idea of the magnitude that an initiative, a policy, a science, an organization can have.
Yeah,
so I hope that answers your question.
It really does. Yeah, thanks very much for that. And I love this actionable framework. So often in discussing SDGs, we have these grand visions, but it's difficult to bring them, to reality. So do you see this as a kind of way to break the political cycle, which sometimes can affect this kind of change?
Oh, absolutely. And I think the most important thing is for everybody to even understand what we're talking about. So I think the problem with the SDGs is that they were written really for international collaboration, but they're quite open to interpretation. And so they're very grand in scale, and they're quite open to interpretation. And so what we're trying to do is to actually make it more accessible, to actually have people speak the same language and see themselves in the SDGs. And I think we have seen time and again that when people are involved, when people feel like it speaks to them, then we can definitely have impact on the political cycle, but really from our own organization, from our own activities all the way out. So I think absolutely we're trying to make them accessible, make them a common language for everybody. And again, everybody across the sectors, across government, academia, industry, for everybody to see and speak the same thing.
Great. Yeah. So this is everybody's homework for the weekend, is to find their 4 SDGs and focus up.
Exactly. And reach out to me after. I'm curious. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks a lot. Great. So next we have Camelia. Tigau. So yes, please take it away. And I would like to remind the audience to please ask questions. Don't be shy. So good stuff. Take it away, Camelia.
Yes, thank you. Well, I come from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, the Center for Research on North America. And I think my presentation sort of complements previous ones with a special study about the migration of IT professionals, which of course may be considered a case of applied scientists, if you like to see it that way. So I'm going to talk about brain drain in times of global populism, the case of Indian IT workers remigrated from the US to Canada, I cannot. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. So the contents of this presentation is actually structured to give you a theoretical background on brain attraction in North America and in the world in general, how the competitive advantages of the Canadian immigration policies have acted as a sort of gain when compared to the United States. What are the numbers of Indians and their situations in the United States and Canada? And then I'm going to talk about a special case, which is movenorth.com, an IT company that has been established in Canada in Toronto. Okay, so just to approach this case, which is based on the personal history of an Indian IT worker who left the US, Silicon Valley, to go to Canada and found his own company, we have to look at previous theoretical background. There is a special researcher called Ariella who was stating since 2016 that the mutual causation of the immigration policies determined that countries such as Canada and the US were actually trying to copy or imitate the others' immigration policies to attract talent.
Hi, Camelia. Sorry about that. I think we had some technical difficulties. This is the nature of a 2020 conference, so please pick it up where you had left off. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's okay. So I don't know how much you heard. I was speaking about the theoretical background to approach the case of Indians who remigrate from the United States to Canada. And I was also talking about how in these times of global populism, disinformation that the first speaker talked about, we were questioning, we were seeing brain gain, the talent attraction being questioned by countries such as the US, UK, Australia, which have been traditionally points of attraction for global talent. And I also use the concept of remigration. There are several studies about it. Remigration refers to how migrants change countries for the second or third time in their lives, sometimes because they are persecuted, sometimes because they choose to do so. And this is the case of Indian migration from the United States to Canada. So I will point to Canada as an extreme case among receiving countries because there is this talk of how maybe foreign talent will damage native talent. In the US, there was talk about that they were stealing jobs from local IT workers. But Canada is an exception to this new populist context against migration, since the country continues to promote migration and new arrivals of workers, especially skilled workers. You already know that, you know better than me. So the Canadian immigration policy continues to serve economic purposes rather than political and cultural protection factors such as in the US. So Canada not only benefits from new arrivals, but also attracts certain relocated migrants from the United States, such as the Indians. So we can talk about the competitive advantages of the Canadian immigration policies, the spillover effect, because there was a reduction of H-1B visas and this anti-migrant discourse in the US, because of the multiculturalism in Canada, because of increasing quotas for migrants. You have a table down there on the screen showing you how Canada is increasing the number of skilled workers that are being attracted to the country. And of course, we have also problems in the Canadian system, such as the integration to the labor market. So many of the workers who got easily into Canada could not find a job according to their skills. They were de-skilled or underskilled. And as such, Canada's new migration plan promises to better job integration for newcomers by matching the skills of needed by the employers to the ones at the mine. This is a comparison of the process of H1B in the US and GSS in Canada. It takes a lot longer in the US to get a visa, to get residence. It is by far more expensive. So this makes a lot of people in the IT industry talk about the Canadian dream. I hope you can still hear me. For many people, the Indians in the US have been the target of this anti-migrant discourse, so they found sort of a new way to a new life by migrating to Canada. Some people, some media talk about Toronto as the Silicon Valley North, and I'm not going to romanticize this discourse. It's just there in the media. It is in the strategies of some IT companies. The Indians, as I said, are a particular case. They are the most relevant population for immigration from the United States to Canada. They have been mostly affected by the changes in the H-1B visas, and instead they now have access to the Canada Global Competencies Program that started in 2017. There are over 1 million Indians in Canada, half of them first-generation migrants, very young, very skilled, and their contributions are both economic and demographic, as you know, by reversing the aging population in Canada. So in my work, I take the case of skilled immigrants from the United States to Canada by looking at this website and all that is behind it, which is movenorth.com. It was created by this person, Vikram Bhatnagar, who was living in the US in Silicon Valley for more than 6 years, and he suddenly realized that maybe he was not able to get residency and citizenship in 20 years. So he said, I have to move. And he chose Canada for various advantages that I can share with you in my paper. So, my method of analysis of this case is an approach of communication. It's the programmatic fields of communication as proposed by a book that we have here in Mexico. And this book proposes by Juan Carlos Barón Pastor, he proposes to study what happens, that is the news, reports, and certain narratives written in a realistic format. And in this way, we can see that the Move North case is a representative one. What entertains, what is said in order to keep the audience connected, not to get bored. And in this case, we have the Canadian dream that is entertaining people. They sort of start building over this new possibility to remake their lives. What sells? This programmatic field is aimed at transforming information into merchandise. And in this field, I analyze the public diplomacy of Toronto in Canada as a safe place and a good destination. Most people see it like that. And what connects, of course, is there in all the social media nowadays, includes feedback from users and similar stories to movenorth.com, and I will only look at two particular declarations of some people about Move North. Some people say, well, who should migrate to Canada? And one of those who give feedback to Move North says, Well, people are not as friendly. They don't hang out with you. This is not discrimination, but part of their culture. And this writer ends up saying, who should migrate? In my opinion, only people who hate their lives in their home country, like me, should consider moving there. If you're contented in your home country, Canada does not have much to offer you. And this comment had 26,000 views in 2018. And another one, some people try to sort of demythifies this perception of romantic Canada, and there is one person who says, Canada is not USA. Let me repeat, Canada is not USA. Our cities may look similar, but as a country we are different on multiple aspects than our southern neighbors. Don't move here if you think you will have easy access to your job market or you will enjoy peasant work culture like USA. USA has a much bigger economy with a radically different tax and pay structure. Canada is still very socialist, high taxes and low pays compared to the United States is a norm. A majority of the people are what we call working poor. So, okay, just to conclude, what does this case teach us? That this recent arrival of skilled immigrants has benefited the Canadian economy, of course, especially in areas such as technology, real estate, and tourism. Its friendly immigration policy and the relative facility of obtaining a working visa can be considered as a competitive advantage that facilitates the spillover effect of the skilled migration from the United States to Canada. And a second conclusion, I'm sorry, the picture is not correct. The case of the Move North company shows that the hospitality towards foreigners in Canada offers a good counterbalance to anti-migrant discourses and discrimination policies towards foreigners in the United States. And this is, of course, part of a broader positioning of Canada as a friendly country to immigration, and part of this global public diplomacy attracting immigration in Canada. So I will leave it here. I don't know how much time I spent because I was out for a minute. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Camelia. And yeah, this is such an important topic and something that was touched upon by Ariella, that you know, the economic and social and scientific impacts of attracting talented immigrants is so high. So this is something that we should really be focusing on. So thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask you if this is something that was significantly accelerated in the Trump era, and if this is the case, then how do we continue this momentum throughout the Biden administration?
Okay, so of course, this was accelerated not only in the discourse, but also in action. Let's see if it continues with the new administration. And it was important because for years we had this discussion on the Canadian brain drain from Canada, people from Canada going to the US. And this discussion that Canada was good at attracting migrants, but not good at keeping them because they were taking Canada as a first step to get to North America and then leading to the US job market. So it is up to Canada to offer these attractive programs of citizenship. We call we talk of the exchange for citizenship against skills, and actually some people would say maybe this is not really an important case because not so many people are moving from the United States to Canada. But there is this talk every time they have elections in the US. Some Americans even say, oh, I would like to move to Canada because I don't like this country. So, okay, how big is big numbers? I would just say that 20,000 skilled IT professionals is a big number, and this is this MoveNorth.com case. So it's not only the statistics, but what these people know to do, the quality of their education, or their experience, that important when we look at this case of professionals.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really appreciate the talk and having the ability to learn more about this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And finally, in this session, we have Robert Watts. So I would like to remind everyone that we'll have a survey that pops up just at the end of this session. So please stick around. It sometimes takes a couple moments to show up on the screen, but we really appreciate your feedback. Okay, take it away, Robert, please.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and I want to thank the conference organizers for the opportunity to present here. I want to start off by doing my own land recognition and recognize that all of us are gathered on different Indigenous territories across the country and maybe in other parts of the world. I'm here at Six Nations of the Grand River, a beautiful Haudenosaunee community in southwestern Ontario. And I'd like to express my gratitude for all of our ancestors for the love and the care that they took with respect to the land and this wonderful legacy that we're all able to enjoy in terms of the beauty that we're surrounded by. So I have created a presentation here on implementing reconciliation and Indigenous knowledge. I'm a vice president of Indigenous relations at the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. Might not seem sort of the most logical place to try innovation with respect to reconciliation and Indigenous knowledge, but I think we have a pretty interesting story to tell, and I want to share that. It kind of cuts across sort of the intersection of policy, of science, of innovation, and of industry, all at the same time. So I'm happy that you're here to join me as part of this journey. With respect to Indigenous knowledge, we had workshops probably about 15 years ago with Indigenous people from all parts of Canada. And one of the things that we were told was that it was really important that we find ways of incorporating Indigenous knowledge into all the work that we do. And we need to find ways of ensuring that there's a part of sharing and working with Indigenous knowledge is to find some receptivity within the organization in order to ensure that that sharing of Indigenous knowledge is manifest in an appropriate way. So in many ways, gatherings like this one that you see this picture of is kind of the university that we've attended with Indigenous elders and Indigenous knowledge keepers, with ceremony playing a central role in terms of creating a space for work to be done, and asking the ancestors for help in terms of the work that we're about to conduct. Our job is to find a long-term home for used nuclear fuel in Canada, and Indigenous knowledge, in our view, is going to help us do that in a good way in terms of interweaving Indigenous worldview, Indigenous knowledge, with Western science in all of our work. This tree shows a little bit of our journey from back in 2002 until now, and maybe a couple points that I want to identify. And this is in 2012, where we formed a Council of Elders, an Elders Forum. This included elders from many parts of Canada and knowledge keepers, and a number of youth that worked with the elders. And the elders work with us hand in hand in terms of helping us create a policy environment and an engagement objectives in order to work properly with Indigenous communities. We've used that knowledge And we're really grateful that we still have a Council of Elders and Youth. We have elders from Saskatchewan East working with us, and again, youth as well. And these elders meet with us 4 or 5 times a year. We go over issues of policy, we go over issues of implementation, and try to sort through some of the really tough issues of sorting through how do we actually interweave Indigenous knowledge and Western science, and how do we actually go about working with knowledge keepers in a respectful and mindful way so that knowledge is shared with us in a way that it can be honored and respected and protected for the long-term use of the Indigenous communities. So to that end, we've looked at some vehicles to help us think this through. One of the things that we've done in the last couple of years is to examine reconciliation based on call to action number 92 from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which really is aimed at corporate Canada and calls upon corporate Canada. You can see here some of the things that it looks at, but one of the things it talks about is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, to use that as a reconciliation framework. And we've done that. So we've taken call to action number 92, and we've developed a reconciliation policy. And this reconciliation policy kind of marries with our traditional knowledge policy. They work hand in hand. If reconciliation is a vehicle in terms of working with Indigenous people, then traditional knowledge is the engine that drives that vehicle and drives the partnership that we're working on. I think it's important that when we think about traditional knowledge from the viewpoint of our corporation, we're talking about an ongoing system of knowledge that was here prior to contact, has been developing and growing over thousands of years and continues to grow and develop. In the early days, I can say there was a bit of a struggle working with some of our scientists and specialists and engineers when we started talking about the contribution that Indigenous people could make to the project, and in particular talking about things like Indigenous science. And I remember one fellow, he said, your people had science? And I'm like, yeah, we had science, and we had engineering, we had architecture, like all those things that any other culture in the entire world would have, we've had here. And it's been in this land, and it's been molded and adopted by the land over thousands of years. So this here's a picture of a ceremony where we blessed with the elders the reconciliation policy. So again, it's kind of interweaving the two, having ceremony to bless and to bring into existence this policy, and also formally bringing it into existence through the work of the board of directors at the NWMO. These are some of the pictures of how we're trying to implement reconciliation at the NWMO. You can see Orange Shirt Day, working with their elders. A picture in the upper left is our CEO, Lori Swami, with one of our elders, Elder Diane Longboat. You can see having signage in Indigenous language are all parts of working with community and ensuring that we're honoring the land that we're on and the people that we're working with. We've, again, having our staff go out on the land with Indigenous elders and knowledge keepers to understand the land from an Indigenous point of view. And we've had, our geologists come back after walking the land with knowledge keepers or elders and talking about how they're sharing with each other. What are the rocks? What are the rocks saying to me, and what are the rocks saying to you? And sharing those different views of looking at the rock. And in that sharing, trying to find ways of understanding, maybe a better understanding for each in terms of how we can think about the rock, how we can think about our work on the land. Also in the top, it shows working with youth and knowledge keepers in terms of analyzing. In this case, it's some of the core samples that were drawn from boreholes in one of the areas that we're working in. Every year for the last number of years, we've had workshops on integration and interweaving Indigenous knowledge and Western science. And this is a picture from that, but it shows those tools, both spiritual and temporal, that are brought to bear in terms of trying to understand our work from an Indigenous knowledge point of view and a Western science point of view. One of the things that we see is how the UN Declaration can help guide us in terms of our thinking and our work, especially free, prior, and informed consent, in terms of how knowledge is shared and how knowledge is protected. This is intellectual property that belongs to the Indigenous community. What we're doing internally, we've developed our own reconciliation baseline so we can understand how we're growing as an organization. We assess our policy, procedures, standards, work plans against a reconciliation lens, and we continue to educate and train our staff in terms of Aboriginal awareness more generally and reconciliation more specifically. I just wanted to include some other examples of reconciliation, both political work that's being done, work by some of our heroes in Canada, like Gord Downey, and the wonderful role that he played in terms of bringing to the world's attention reconciliation and issues with respect to residential schools in Canada, the apology by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and the work of Indigenous leadership promoting reconciliation and calling out to Canada to find ways of both indigenizing some of our institutions in Canada and ways of working, and decolonizing some of those things that act as barriers to us working in the spirit of reconciliation. That's my presentation. I can say that be happy to follow up with anybody in terms of work that we're doing, specifically at the NWMO. We work with other industries in terms of sharing some of the ways that we've been trying to plot a way forward and to act in the spirit of reconciliation, and happy to share that story with anybody and any of the policies and tools that we've created. We're happy to share those as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Robert. Yeah, this was extremely interesting, and I'm really happy that you were able to participate in the session. Of course, I think I speak for everyone at the conference when I say that this work is extremely important, and our work towards reconciliation and implementing Indigenous knowledge and traditional knowledge is something that we should all strive towards. I'm curious, you mentioned that your organization, for example, protects the IP of Indigenous knowledge. So could you speak a little bit more about how that's done?
Yeah, we've actually entered into agreements with communities in terms of the sort of information that they share with us, what we can make publicly available, and what we're bound to by contract, just to maintain confidential between that community and ourselves. We've done some work recently with the Assembly of First Nations, actually to develop a couple other agreements that go into greater specificity in terms of protection of intellectual property rights. And we're going to again be working with communities to ensure that, to the extent that knowledge is required to be protected, that it will be.
That's brilliant. I'm curious as well, because I mean, there's a significant portion of the general population which are very wary of nuclear technology. I'm curious how Indigenous communities, how receptive they are to working with you. Or are they appreciative of having this opportunity to voice their opinions, or is there some resistance to it in general?
You know, I think that's a mix. I think oftentimes, no matter who we meet with, there's skepticism at the start, maybe fear. What we've found is that through education, that oftentimes attitude changes. Be able to almost do sort of hands-on. We have great relationships with people like at Bruce Power or Pickering or Darlington, where people can go and see how used nuclear fuel is being stored. So, I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions in mythology about nuclear power and nuclear waste. Education plays a great role. Sometimes it changes minds, and sometimes people have their views and they're resistant to change, and that's human nature as well. But I think that the sort of respect and respectful process that we try to engender, and that attitude in terms of sharing and welcoming and being mindful and respectful, I think really help at least to create a safe environment to be able to learn within. And we're keen to learn too about the communities that we're working with, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities.
Yeah, it was when touches upon my next question, which was, what are the best practices? What have you found are the best practices for integrating Indigenous knowledge with kind of modern science? And you touched upon that, I guess, just being respectful and welcoming. And I don't know if you want to speak any more about that.
I think, this idea of being inquisitive, I mean, one of the things that we've learned, there's a few things that are really essential to the work that we're doing, and that's the role that copper plays, both in the environment, but also protecting people in the environment from radioactivity, the role of bentonite clay. I mean, these are things that Indigenous people have been using in their own way over millennia. And so learning and sharing with Indigenous people, this is how copper works in this instance, this is what it's used for that. Same with clay, same with understanding rock and water. I mean, all of these things are natural elements that are part of our work, but have been part of Indigenous knowledge and application of knowledge for thousands of years. So there's actually ends up being oftentimes quite an excitement between knowledge holders and scientists as they share, this is what we know about this, and this is how that can work with that. And it's been a really great journey in that regard.
Yeah, I could see that. The curiosity of scientists and just having this untapped knowledge which they can learn from, it would be very exciting. I understand that completely. And you mentioned that your company has been around since 2002. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So has there been a big shift in the in kind of the perception and receptivity of government organizations and other organizations across Canada since that time in the 18 years?
I think there has. I mean, there's some government and some government organizations that are, incredibly knowledgeable about these issues, and some governments have sort of grown their own policies and procedures, kind of in sync with what we've been doing. This has been a, exploration for all of Canada to think about reconciliation, and it's been a journey for all of Canada to imagine how Indigenous knowledge can be applied to major developments. We're asked to do that through the Impact Assessment Act, and so some of this is new for all of us, and we're trying to figure out our way through this. To me, it's an incredibly exciting time to be working with all these different knowledge systems to try to create some of the very best methodologies and ways forward on some really difficult issues.
Absolutely, and I thank you so much for sharing your insights. I'm aware that we've run out of time, unfortunately, but I'd like to ask Anna if we could bring up all the speakers onto the stage once more so they could say goodbye to our audience. If that's possible. If that's not, that's okay. I know one audience member was asking for Ariella's email. It is ariella@thinkstiletto.com. ariella@thinkstiletto.com. And I guess you could also Google Stiletto if you're curious about that as well. I'm being told that we can't bring everybody back on the stage, so I'll just say thank you very much to all of our speakers. This was a very exciting panel, and I'm so happy to have been involved. And please stick around for the survey on behalf of CSPC. Thanks to everyone. Have a great day.